The first thing Elijah Cutter saw wasn't the blizzard. It wasn't the horse stopping on its own, its breath pluming like a ghost in the freezing air. It wasn't even the sight of his own cabin, a place that was supposed to be a warm refuge against the biting Colorado winter. No, the first thing Eli saw was his sons. Three small figures, huddled together against a porch post, their faces raw and red from the cold. They looked like tiny frozen statues. Sam, the oldest at 10, had his arms wrapped around his younger brothers. Joshua, the middle one, was shivering so hard his whole body seemed to vibrate. And little Micah, the youngest, wasn't moving at all. Snow had crusted on their sleeves, their pants were soaked solid at the knees, and their breath was so faint it barely made a mist in the air. But they weren't crying. Not a single tear. They just looked up at him with old, tired eyes, eyes that had been waiting for the world to end. And for them, maybe it just had. Eli didn't even feel his boots hit the snow as he slid from the saddle. He ran, his heart a cold, hard knot in his chest. "Sam!" he choked out, his voice breaking on the name. The boy stirred, trying to stand on legs that wouldn't obey. Eli fell to his knees in the snow, ripping off his thick gloves. He touched their coats, their boots, their skin. It was like touching ice. "Why?" he asked, his voice sharp with a terror so deep it felt like it was splitting him in two. "Why are you out here?" Sam's lips were cracked and blue. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. He just glanced, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, toward the cabin door. It was only 10 feet away, shut tight against the storm. And through the cracks, Eli could see it, the warm yellow flicker of firelight. Sam started, then stopped, a flicker of fear in his eyes. He swallowed, a painful, difficult thing. "She locked us out." The words hit Eli harder than any physical blow. It wasn't just the cold. It wasn't just the blizzard. It was the way Sam said it, like it wasn't a surprise, like it wasn't the first time. Eli's world tilted on its axis. He scooped up Micah, who felt terrifyingly light, and tucked Joshua under his other arm. "Sam, follow me, now." He half expected the door to be barred, but when he reached it, the handle turned easily. It didn't even creak as it swung open. Warmth rushed out to meet them, the smell of rich stew and wood smoke. A fire roared in the hearth, and sitting in front of it, curled in a plush chair with a steaming cup in her hands, was Charlotte, his new wife. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even look up. "You're home early," she said, her voice as flat and cold as the winter landscape outside. Eli didn't speak. He couldn't. A rage he'd never known was building in his chest, so hot it felt like it was boiling his blood. He moved with a strange, deliberate calm, setting Micah down near the stove and stripping off the child's frozen coat. He knelt, working at Joshua's boots with numb fingers, trying to rub some life back into his frozen toes. Sam just stood in the doorway, frozen in place, as if stepping inside without permission would earn him a beating. The boy's fear was a physical thing in the room, more real than the fire, more powerful than the warmth. Eli finally looked at her. He kept his voice quiet, but it was sharper than a razor. "How long, Charlotte?" She finally turned her head, her pretty face a mask of indifference. "They were being noisy. I told them to play outside." She took a delicate sip from her cup. "I didn't think you'd be back until Friday." "It's nearly dark," Eli said, the quiet in his voice turning dangerous. "There's a blizzard rolling in. You can't have missed it." She shrugged, a gesture of such casual cruelty it took his breath away. "They have coats. A little cold builds grit. I don't see the harm." Eli rose slowly to his feet. He was not a violent man. The war had burned that out of him. But in that moment, looking at the woman he had married, he understood how a man could kill. "They're children," he said, his voice a low growl. "My children." And that's when the mask finally slipped. Her pretty face twisted into a sneer. "They are not mine," she snapped, her eyes flashing with a venom he'd never seen before. "And this whole arrangement was the worst bargain I ever made." Something inside Elijah Cutter broke. He saw her then, really saw her for the first time. Not as the sweet-faced widow from town, but as a stranger. A predator he had willingly invited into his home, into the lives of his sons. Pack your things, he said, his voice even, devoid of all emotion. She blinked, her mouth falling open. What? You heard me. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned his back on her, grabbing another blanket from a hook and wrapping it around Sam's thin, trembling shoulders. He gently guided his oldest son fully into the cabin, past the woman who had tried to freeze him to death. He shut the door, sealing them all inside with the warmth and the terrible, suffocating tension. The night passed in near silence. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft whimpers of the boys as they slept, lost in feverish nightmares. Eli sat awake the entire night, his back against the wall, his rifle across his lap, his eyes fixed on the woman who sat in the chair, staring into the dying embers of the fire. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't speak another word. By morning, she was gone. The boys didn't ask where she went. Part of Eli wanted to leave it there, to just let the poison of her presence drain away. But a darker question gnawed at him. He knew with a sickening certainty that this wasn't the first time. The bruises he'd seen on Sam, explained away as a fall from a tree, the way Joshua flinched whenever a voice was raised, the way little Micah clung to him with desperate strength every time he had to leave for a long ride. He should have seen it. He should have known. He waited until the younger boys were occupied, then sat down with Sam at the kitchen table. He kept his voice gentle. Sam, you have to tell me the truth now. Was last night the first time? Sam wouldn't look at him. He just stared at his hands, his face a mask of shame. He whispered, his voice barely audible. When you were gone, she was different. Meals would get skipped. The chores got harder. If we complained, she'd find ways to punish us. Eli felt the cold rage returning, colder and harder this time. What kind of punishments? The boy flinched, a ghost of past pain flickering across his face. She said if we ever told you, she'd make sure you didn't come back next time. She said you'd leave us for good. Eli closed his eyes, the words a physical blow. She hadn't just hurt them. She had poisoned their minds, turned their love for him into a weapon to be used against them. He had failed them. He had left them with a monster, and he had been blind to it. Pa, Sam said, his voice even smaller now, she took your silver pocket watch, and Ma's locket. Eli's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The watch had been his father's, but the locket held the only thing he had left of Sarah, his first wife, a tiny lock of her golden hair, cut just after she'd passed, bringing Micah into the world. It was all he had to remember her by. It doesn't matter, he lied, his voice thick. He pulled Sam into a fierce hug. The only thing that mattered was the haunted boy in his arms. The only thing that mattered now was making it right. But as he held his son, a new terrifying thought began to form. Charlotte was cruel, yes. But this felt like more than just cruelty. It felt calculated. It felt planned. Why go to such lengths? Why steal those specific items? It wasn't just about hurting him. It was about erasing his past. And a cold dread settled in his gut as he realized he had no idea who or what he had truly brought into his home. The nightmare he suspected was far from over. It was just beginning. 3 days passed in a strange, fragile quiet. The boys stuck close to the cabin, as if its wooden walls were the only thing holding the world together. Eli focused on the simple things: chopping wood, cooking rich stews, mending torn clothes. He was trying to mend their broken trust, one small act of care at a time. He sat with Joshua through his nightmares and held Micah when the boy asked, in a tiny voice, if it was his fault the new Ma had gone away. No, Eli said, his voice like iron. None of this is your fault, ever. On the fourth morning, he hitched the wagon. We're out of flour and coffee, he announced, forcing a cheerfulness he didn't feel. Time for a trip to town, all of us. Redemption Creek wasn't much of a town. It was a day's ride away, a dusty collection of buildings clinging to the side of a mountain that had been stripped bare by a silver mine. Eli felt the eyes on them the moment they pulled onto the main street. Faces turned in windows. Men stopped talking on the boardwalk. Whispers followed them like a disease. This was more than just the usual curiosity. This was something else, something hostile. He tied the horses outside Hammond's general store. "Sam, watch your brothers. I'll be quick." Inside, old Mr. Hammond was weighing sugar for Mrs. Peterson. Both of them glanced up when Eli walked in, then quickly looked away, their faces shutting down. "Morning," Eli said, his voice level. Hammond just nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Cutter." The silence in the store was heavy, suffocating. As Eli gathered his supplies, he could feel their stares on his back. When he finally approached the counter, Hammond cleared his throat, a loud, nervous sound. "Heard your wife left you," he said, busying himself with tallying the items. "She's gone," Eli said simply. Mrs. Peterson clutched her parcel to her chest. "Just gone?" she asked, her voice a little too sharp. "Or did you run her off?" Eli placed his coins on the counter, his movements slow and deliberate. "What are you talking about?" Hammond finally looked at him, his expression a mixture of fear and accusation. "Charlotte came through here 2 days ago, Eli. Said some troubling things." Eli felt that cold dread from the cabin return, prickling his skin. "I'm sure she did." "She said you had a temper," Hammond said, his voice dropping. "A bad one. Said you threw her out in the middle of the blizzard with nothing but the clothes on her back. Said she feared for her life." Eli's blood ran cold. The lies were so perfect, so believable. Charlotte, the refined, soft-spoken woman from the city. Eli, the quiet, hard man from the mountains. A man who had seen war and carried its scars. Who would they believe? He already knew the answer. "My sons were locked outside in that snow when I got home," Eli said, his voice dangerously low. "You're welcome to ask them what happened." Hammond just looked uncomfortable. "I'm just telling you what folks are saying, Eli. And right now, they're saying you're a monster." Eli paid for his goods and walked out, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of fury and fear. Outside, the whispers had stopped. Now people were just staring, their faces hard and accusing. And that's when he saw them. 3 men approaching the wagon. The man in the lead was tall, dressed in an expensive city coat that looked completely out of place in Redemption Creek. Eli recognized him instantly. Wendell Blackwood, the man who owned the mine, the saloon, the hotel, the man who owned the town. Eli stepped between Blackwood and the wagon, shielding his sons from view. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwood?" Blackwood's smile was thin and cold, like a crack in ice. "It's about my sister, Cutter." Eli's mind went blank. "Sister?" "My dear sister, Charlotte," Blackwood said, his smile widening as he saw the shock on Eli's face. "She came to me with quite a terrible tale of abuse and cruelty. She's quite distressed." The ground seemed to fall away beneath Eli's feet. This wasn't just a cruel woman telling lies. This was a conspiracy. Charlotte hadn't just stumbled into his life by chance. She had been sent. "She showed me the bruises, Mr. Cutter," Blackwood continued, his voice smooth as silk. "Bruises she said you gave her. Said you've been mistreating these fine boys too." "That's a lie," Eli said, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip. One of Blackwood's men mirrored the movement, his hand resting on the butt of his own gun. "Is it?" Blackwood said, his eyes glinting. "Charlotte is a respectable woman, a loving stepmother, and a judge is likely to believe her, especially when she petitions for custody of the children she's so worried about." Custody. The word slammed into Eli like a physical blow. They weren't just trying to ruin his name. They were trying to take his sons. "That land of yours, Cutter," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The railroad's coming through. Its value is about to skyrocket. Charlotte was trying to do you a favor, offering to buy you out. But you had to be difficult." It all clicked into place. The marriage, the cruelty designed to drive a wedge between him and the boys, the lies to the town. It had never been about him, or even about Charlotte. It had always been about the land. "Now," Blackwood said, his smile vanishing, "we'll have to do this the hard way." He took a step closer. "Give me the boys, Cutter. The court will find you an unfit father. This way is cleaner, less pain for them." Eli looked at Blackwood, then at the hostile faces of the townspeople surrounding them. He looked at his sons, huddled in the wagon, their eyes wide with terror. He was trapped, outnumbered. His reputation was destroyed, and a powerful man was about to steal his children, all while the town watched and approved. He was completely and utterly alone. Or so he thought. Just as he was about to make a stand, he knew he couldn't win. He saw a flicker of movement from the alley beside the general store. A young girl, no more than 14, thin and ragged, with eyes that looked far too old for her face. As Sam climbed back into the wagon, she darted out, pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand, and vanished back into the shadows. Eli saw the exchange, his mind racing. Who was she? As their wagon pulled away from the hostile stares of Redemption Creek, watched by the cold, triumphant smile of Wendell Blackwood, Sam unfolded the note. "Pa," he said, his voice small, "it says, 'My father fought with you. You are not alone.'" Eli took the paper. The handwriting was neat, careful. "Who gave this to you?" "A girl," Sam said, "with red hair." Eli's breath caught in his throat. He knew only one man from the war who had a red-haired daughter, Joseph Holloway, a man who had taken a Confederate bullet meant for Eli at Gettysburg, a man who had made Eli promise, with his dying breath, to look after his family if anything should happen. A promise Eli had tried and failed to keep in the chaos after the war. He hadn't just been sent a message. He'd been sent a ghost. The ride home was a blur of fear and confusion. As they crested the last ridge overlooking their homestead, Eli saw him. A lone rider sitting on a horse in the tree line, watching their cabin, just watching. Eli raised a hand, not knowing if it was a greeting or a warning. The rider turned his horse and melted back into the forest. "Stay in the wagon," Eli told the boys, his hand closing around the stock of the rifle he kept under the seat. He walked into the trees, following the fresh hoof prints in the snow. Near a large pine he found it, a piece of paper nailed to the trunk with a hunting knife. The note was short, the words scrawled in a rough hand. "If you know what's good for you, Cutter, give the children to their stepmother. That mine belongs to Blackwood." Mine? There was no mine on his land, just rocky pastures and a stream. Unless... Eli crushed the note in his fist. He'd heard old prospectors' tales of gold in these hills, but they were just stories. But if Blackwood thought there was gold, it explained everything. Why Charlotte had suddenly appeared in church last spring, her sights set on a lonely widower with 3 boys and a remote piece of land. It was never about marriage. It was a hostile takeover. The boys, his family, they were just leverage, a tool to be used and discarded to get to the real prize. That night Eli didn't sleep. He sat by the fire cleaning his rifle, his mind a whirlwind of plans. He was a farmer, not a strategist, but the war had taught him a thing or two about fighting a superior force. You didn't meet them head on. You found their weakness. You used the terrain. You survived. A sound from the barn startled him. Not the usual settling of timbers. Something else. Someone. He grabbed his revolver and slipped out into the cold, moonlit night. He moved like a shadow, his years of hunting making his steps silent in the snow. At the barn door he paused, listening. A soft rustle from the hayloft, then a small, frightened voice. "Please, don't shoot." Eli raised his revolver. "Come down, slow." A figure descended the ladder. As she stepped into the moonlight slanting through the barn door, he recognized her instantly. It was the girl from town, the red-haired girl. "You gave my son that note," Eli said, lowering his gun slightly. She nodded, her chin held high despite the fear in her eyes. "I did. My name is Ruth. Ruth Holloway." Eli holstered his weapon. The ghost had a name. "I knew your father. He was a good man." "He said the same about you," she said, her voice wavering. "Before he died, he made me memorize your name. He said if I was ever in real trouble, I should find Elijah Cutter." "Why are you here, Ruth?" Eli asked gently. "Where's your mother?" The girl's shoulders slumped, the bravery seeming to drain out of her. "She died last winter. The fever. After that, they came." "They?" "That woman, Charlotte, and her brother, Blackwood." Ruth's hands clenched into small, tight fists. "They said the bank was calling in our loan. Said we'd lose everything. My mother was too sick to understand the papers she was signing. After she died, they gave me a week to clear out. They said our property belonged to Blackwood Mining now. The pieces were slamming together in Eli's mind, forming a picture of monstrous, calculated greed. And you've been following them? Ruth nodded. I heard them talking. About you. About your land. They want it for the gold vein that runs through these hills. They've been buying up all the properties along it. Yours is the last one they need. Eli felt a cold anger settle deep in his bones. This was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just a simple land grab. It was a systematic campaign to steal land from vulnerable people, from widows and orphans. Then Ruth looked at him, her old eyes filled with a terrible certainty. Charlotte, she isn't really his sister. Eli frowned. What do you mean? She works for him, Ruth whispered, glancing toward the cabin where his son slept. She finds men with the right kind of land. Lonely men. Widowers. She's done this before, Pa. At least 3 times that I know of. The world spun. A cruel stepmother was one thing. A greedy liar was another. But a professional predator? A woman who made a living out of destroying families for profit? He had invited a serpent into his home, and it had been coiled around his children all along. They'll come for the boys, Ruth said, her voice flat with grim certainty. That's how they work. They'll use the law. They'll say you're an unfit father. They'll get the court to give Charlotte custody, and once she has the boys, she has the land. They can try, Eli said, his voice hardening into something he hadn't heard since the war. But I've fought worse men than Wendell Blackwood. As they stood there in the cold moonlight, a new sound cut through the night. Hoof beats, a single rider, approaching fast. Eli pushed Ruth back into the shadows of the barn, his rifle back in his hands. He stepped onto the porch as the rider pulled his horse to a halt. It wasn't Blackwood. It was Sheriff Matthew Grant. And from the grim look on his face, something was terribly wrong. Cutter, the sheriff said, dismounting stiffly. We need to talk. Bit late for a social call, Sheriff. This ain't social. Grant's face was grim in the moonlight. He held out a folded document. Blackwood's been to see the judge. He got a temporary custody order for your boys, pending a hearing. He's claiming you're unstable, dangerous. The world tilted again. That's not possible. It's more than possible. It's done. Grant handed over the paper. You're to appear in court in 3 days. Until then, the boys are supposed to go with Charlotte. Eli took the paper, but didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of the lies inside. And you came to enforce this? The sheriff took off his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. I came to warn you, Eli. Blackwood's bought half this town, the judge included. But I've known you since you settled here. You're a hard man, but you're a fair one. You'd never hurt those boys. They're not taking my sons, Eli said, his voice like iron. I know, Grant said. That's why I rode out ahead. Blackwood's deputized 3 of his miners. They'll be here by morning to serve those papers. He glanced toward the dark woods. If I were you, I'd be gone before sunrise. Eli studied the sheriff's face, searching for the trick. Why are you helping me? Because I was at Gettysburg, too, Grant said quietly. Different company, but I saw what you did for Holloway and his men. A man like that doesn't just turn into what Blackwood's claiming. He put his hat back on. You've got a few friends left in Redemption Creek, Eli, whether you know it or not. But right now you need to get those boys somewhere safe. The sheriff turned to leave, then paused. Judge Ezekiel Monroe over in Silver Falls. He's retired, but he knew your father. He's an honest man. He might be your only chance. Eli watched Grant right away, the useless custody order clutched in his hand. He was no longer just a father protecting his children. He was an outlaw, a fugitive in his own home. He looked at the cabin where his son slept, unaware that the law itself was coming to tear them away. He had one night to disappear. He stepped back inside the cabin. Sam and Ruth were awake, their faces pale in the lamplight. We have to go, don't we? Sam asked, his voice older than his years. Eli nodded, his mind already racing. Pack what you can carry. We leave before dawn. Ruth stood up, her small frame filled with a surprising strength. I know a place, she said. An old line cabin, high in the mountains. Trappers used it years ago. No one goes there now. It's hidden. They'll never find us. And so, under the cold, watchful eyes of the moon, Elijah Cutter and his broken family prepared to run. He was leaving behind his home, his land, his wife's grave. He was running from a man who owned the law, who could turn a whole town against him with a handful of well-told lies. He didn't know where they were going or what they would find. He only knew one thing for certain. He would not lose his sons. Not to Blackwood, not to anyone. The war had taken enough from him. He would not let the peace take what was left. The world was a blur of gray mist and dark pines. They rode hard, pushing north into the high country, away from the life Eli had built and toward an unknown future. Ruth led the way, navigating the winding game trails with an instinct that defied her age. She rode with Eli, while Sam managed Joshua on his own horse. Little Micah was bundled in front of Eli, his small head resting against his father's chest. They were a strange, desperate caravan. A father turned outlaw, 3 sons who had seen too much, and a girl who was a ghost from a promise Eli had failed to keep. By midday, they stopped by a frozen stream to rest the horses. The boys were quiet, the gravity of their flight settling over them like a shroud. "Are we ever going home, Pa?" Micah asked, his small voice echoing in the vast silence. Eli knelt, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. "Yes, son. When this is over, we'll go home." "When what's over?" Eli looked at the faces of his children, at Ruth's determined stare. They deserved the truth. "The bad woman," he said gently, "and her associate. They want our land, but they can't have it. We're going to make sure of that." Suddenly, Sam, who had been standing lookout on a rock, dropped into a crouch. "Riders," he hissed, "coming fast from the south." Eli was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. They're on our trail." Blackwood, faster than he'd expected. "Mount up," Eli ordered. "Now." They scrambled onto their horses. Ruth pointed to a steep deer trail that climbed up the side of the mountain. "This way. There's a ridge. We might be able to lose them in the rocks." They spurred their horses, the animals scrambling up the treacherous incline. Behind them, shouts echoed through the trees as the riders found their abandoned resting spot. "Cutter!" a voice bellowed. "We know you're out there. Blackwood just wants to talk." A shot rang out, splintering bark from a tree just inches from Eli's head. Talk was the last thing they wanted. The trail narrowed, forcing them into single file. The terrain grew more dangerous, a tangle of loose shale and exposed roots. Another shot cracked through the air, this one closer. They were gaining. The trail opened onto a rocky shelf. Ruth pulled up sharply, veering toward what looked like a solid wall of stone. But as they got closer, Eli saw it. A narrow gap, almost completely hidden by a massive fallen pine, just wide enough for a horse to squeeze through. "Single file," Ruth called back. "Keep your heads down." She disappeared into the passage. Sam and Joshua followed. Eli urged his horse forward, Micah clinging to the saddle horn, his eyes wide with fear. Just as they entered the gap, another shot rang out. Eli's horse screamed and reared, a burning pain searing across his upper arm. He'd been hit. "Pa!" Micah cried out. "It's all right," Eli gritted out through clenched teeth, forcing the horse forward. "Just a scratch. Hold on." They squeezed through the gap and emerged into a small hidden canyon. The walls rose steeply on all sides. They were safe for now. "You're hit," Sam said, his eyes fixed on Eli's sleeve, which was rapidly turning dark with blood. From the entrance to their hiding spot, they could hear the frustrated voices of their pursuers. "They can't have just disappeared. Spread out. Blackwood wants those kids by sunset, or it's our hides." One of the men sounded different from the others. His voice was deeper, more authoritative. "Jenkins, you and Harrison circle west. Davis and I will check to the east. If you find them, fire twice. But do not engage Cutter alone. The man killed a dozen Rebs at Gettysburg with nothing but a broken musket." Eli almost smiled. His reputation, it seemed, had grown. Then another voice spoke, and the smile vanished from his face. "What about the girl? The Holloway brat?" "Blackwood doesn't care about her," the authoritative voice replied. "If she's with Cutter, she's fair game." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. They weren't just hunting him. They were hunting them all. They rested only for a moment before pushing on, deeper into the mountains, following Ruth through a maze of high country few men had ever seen. That night they made a small, smokeless fire in a sheltered bowl. Eli cleaned his wound. The bullet had only grazed him, but it was deep and painful. "Does it hurt bad, Pa?" Joshua asked, his eyes wide. "I've had worse," Eli assured him. It was the truth. He still carried a piece of a Confederate cannonball in his left thigh from Shiloh. To distract them, he told them the story of how he met their mother, Sarah, how she'd called him a filthy cowpuncher before she'd agreed to marry him. For a few minutes, they were just a family around a campfire, the danger seeming a world away. Later, after the boys were asleep, Ruth spoke, her voice low. "My father said you saved his whole unit at Gettysburg, said you led them out when they were trapped behind enemy lines." "Your father saved me," Eli said quietly. "He took a bullet that had my name on it." "That's why you promised to look after us," she stated. It wasn't a question. The weight of that old promise, of his failure to find her and her mother after the war, settled on him heavily. "I'm keeping it now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have my word." He couldn't sleep. The image of his sons in the snow was burned into his mind. He had been a fool to trust Charlotte, to let loneliness blind him to the danger she represented. "It's not your fault," Ruth said, as if reading his thoughts. She had settled beside him, wrapped in a blanket. "Charlotte fooled everyone. She has a way of making you see what you want to see. I should have known better." "Why?" she challenged him. "Because you fought in a war. My father was the smartest man I knew, and he trusted people he shouldn't have. He said it was better to be occasionally deceived than to live without trust at all." Her words, so full of her father's wisdom, were a small comfort. She was just a child, but she had an old soul, one that had been forged in loss and hardship, just like his. They reached the line cabin the next afternoon. It was small and rough, but it was dry and, most importantly, hidden. They would be safe here for a day or two, long enough to rest the horses before pushing on to Silver Falls and Judge Monroe. But as the first light of dawn crept through the trees, a horse's nervous whinny from outside shattered the quiet. Eli was awake instantly, his hand on his revolver. He moved to the cabin's single warped window and peered out. Shadowy figures were moving through the trees, at least 3 of them. They'd been found. Eli woke Sam and Ruth with a hand over their mouths. "Riders," he whispered. No noise. They were trapped. The cabin had only one door, facing the approaching men. "Is there a cellar?" Eli whispered to Ruth. She nodded, pointing to the rough bed platform. "Under there. A food cache." He lifted the planks. The hole was small, but the 3 boys could fit. "Sam, take your brothers down. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." "What about you and Ruth?" Sam protested. "We'll lead them away. We'll circle back." "No," Sam said, his jaw set with a stubbornness that reminded Eli so much of Sarah. "I can shoot. I'm staying with you." There was no time to argue. Eli helped Joshua and Micah into the hole, covering it with pine boughs. "Don't come out until I call for you," he whispered. He turned to Sam and Ruth. "There's a gap in the collapsed chimney on the north side. Squeeze through. Get to the horses if you can. If not, head for the rocks. I'll create a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Ruth asked, her eyes wide. Eli checked the load on his rifle. "The loud kind." He gripped Sam's shoulder. "I'll be right behind you. I promise." He watched them disappear through the gap. Then he took a deep breath, positioned himself beside the door, and waited. "Cutter," a voice called from outside. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful. We just want the boys." Eli didn't answer. He listened to their footsteps getting closer, their voices growing more confident. "Last chance, Cutter," the man shouted, "or we're coming and shooting." Eli kicked the door open and fired. His first shot caught the nearest man in the shoulder, spinning him around. His second took another in the leg. The third man dove for cover as Eli burst from the cabin, firing again to keep their heads down. He sprinted into the forest, deliberately running in the opposite direction from Sam and Ruth, drawing the pursuit after him. Bullets ripped through the trees around him. He ducked behind a massive pine, reloaded, and waited. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and wounded. But he was fighting for more than just his own life. He was fighting for his sons. And a man like that is the most dangerous thing in the world. He was no longer Elijah Cutter, the quiet farmer. He was Sergeant Cutter of the Union Army, the man who had held Little Round Top against impossible odds. And he was not about to lose this war. The forest was a chaotic symphony of snapping twigs and shouting men. Eli moved like a ghost, using the thick morning mist as his cover. He led his pursuers on a wild chase, deeper and deeper into the unforgiving wilderness, pulling them further and further away from the cabin where his younger sons were hiding. He circled back, becoming the hunter instead of the hunted. He saw one of the men below him, moving cautiously along his trail. The man was tall, with a military bearing, a professional. "I know what you're doing, Cutter," the man called out, his voice surprisingly calm. "Drawing us away from the kids. It's noble, but pointless. Blackwood's got 20 men combing these mountains." Eli remained silent, lining up his shot. "For what it's worth," the man continued, "I don't like using children as pawns, but a man's got to eat." He was directly below Eli now. An easy shot. Eli's finger tightened on the trigger, then the man stopped. He tilted his head and looked straight up, right into Eli's eyes. "You won't shoot," he said, a strange certainty in his voice. "Not in cold blood. Not after Gettysburg." Eli froze. "What do you know about Gettysburg?" The man lowered his rifle slightly. "I was there. Different uniform, but same hell. Name's Daniel Burke, 12th Virginia. A rebel, here in his woods, hunting his family." "You're a long way from home," Eli said, his voice flat. "Got no home to go back to," Burke said with a shrug. He slowly set his rifle on the ground. "I'll tell the others you went north. Buy you some time." Eli didn't lower his weapon. "Why?" "Because at Gettysburg," Burke said, his eyes holding Eli's, "when my company was pinned down, you let our medics retrieve the wounded. You could have wiped us out, but you didn't. One debt deserves another." Eli weighed the man's words. It could be a trap, but there was a weariness in Burke's eyes that felt real, a resignation that Eli knew all too well. "How many men does Blackwood really have out here?" "8, including me," Burke said. "He's in Silver Falls now, camped outside town. He's mighty interested in some retired judge who lives there." Judge Monroe. Blackwood was already cutting off his escape. "What does he want with my boys?" Eli demanded. Burke hesitated. "It's not about the boys, Cutter. It's about the land. There's gold, sure. But there's something else, too. Something Blackwood found on some old Army survey maps. Something he's willing to burn down the whole territory to get." Before Eli could ask more, Burke picked up his rifle. "I've said my piece. I'll lead the others north. Can't promise how long it'll buy you." He turned and walked away, calling out to his men. "Found tracks, heading north toward the ridge." Eli watched him go, a storm of questions in his mind. He made his way back to the cabin, circling wide. The other men were gone, but so were the horses. He squeezed back through the chimney gap. The cabin was empty. He threw open the trap door to the cellar. It was empty. A cold, terrifying dread seized him. Had Blackwood's men found them? "Pa?" The whisper came from the doorway. It was Sam, his face pale but determined. "Ruth has the horses hidden up the ridge. My brothers are with her. They're safe. But we have to go. Now. There are more riders coming." As they ran, Micah pointed back toward the cabin. A thick column of black smoke was rising into the sky. Blackwood's men had set it ablaze. It wasn't just a pursuit anymore. It was a message. There was no going back. They rode west, then south, pushing toward Silver Falls. They had to get to Judge Monroe before Blackwood did. They stopped to rest in a sheltered ravine. That's when Sam told him what he'd overheard one of the men at the cabin say. "He said Charlotte was waiting at the old Richardson place," Sam said, "and that Blackwood wanted the boys delivered there. Not to town." The Richardson place, an abandoned homestead just a few miles outside of Silver Falls. It was a trap. They were waiting for them. "Pa, that's crazy," Sam protested when Eli told them his plan. "It's the last place they'll expect us to go," Eli said, a grim determination setting in. "They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them." They watched the Richardson place from a ridge as dusk fell. Smoke curled from the chimney. Two of Blackwood's men were on the porch, rifles held loosely in their hands. Eli left Ruth and the younger boys hidden in an old spring house by the creek. He and Sam crept through the tall grass toward the back of the farmhouse. Through an open window they could hear voices. It was Charlotte, her voice sharp and impatient. Burke should have been back by now. How hard can it be to find one broken-down soldier and 3 brats? Maybe Cutter got to him first, a man's voice said. Charlotte laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. Cutter is a sentimental fool. Wendell is bringing the special deed from town, the one with the governor's seal on it, a very good forgery. Once that doddering old Judge Monroe signs it, those boys become my legal wards. Their land becomes my land, and Elijah Cutter becomes a wanted man. Blackmail, forgery. This conspiracy went deeper than he could have ever imagined. Then he heard something that made his blood run cold. "And what about Cutter?" the man asked. "If he's stupid enough to show his face," Charlotte's voice was like ice, "kill him. The law won't look too hard at a kidnapper's death. But I want the boys alive. They're the key to everything." They retreated back to the spring house, the chilling words echoing in Eli's mind. He had to warn Judge Monroe. He had to expose Blackwood's plan before it was too late. "We'll all go," Eli decided. "Tonight. There's an old logging road that leads to the back of Monroe's property. We can bypass the town." They rode through the night, a silent, desperate procession. Just as they crested a ridge, Eli heard it. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders coming up behind them, fast. "They found us," Ruth whispered. There was no outrunning them. Eli made a decision that tore at his soul. "We split up," he said, his voice firm. "Ruth, you take the boys. Follow that logging road to Judge Monroe's. Tell him everything. I'll lead these riders away." "No, Pa," Sam cried. "Listen to me," Eli insisted, his voice raw. "They want me more than they want you." He knelt, pulling Micah into a fierce hug. "I will find you. No matter what happens, I will find you. I promise." He watched them disappear into the trees, a part of his heart breaking as they went. Then he turned his horse and spurred it back down the trail, directly toward the approaching riders. He made no attempt to hide his trail. He was the bait. He galloped up a steep, rocky slope, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. He found what he was looking for, a natural fortress of massive boulders. He slid from his saddle, slapped his horse's flank to send it running, and scrambled up into the rocks. He had 14 rounds in his rifle and 6 in his revolver. 20 shots against at least 6 men. The odds weren't good, but he wasn't fighting for odds. He was fighting for time. Time for his children to reach safety. The riders appeared below, dark shapes against the starlit sky. "Cutter!" It was Jenkins, one of the men from the cabin. "We know you're up there. Give it up. Your boys are already caught. We picked them up an hour ago." A lie. A clumsy attempt to make him reveal his position. Eli remained silent, sighting down his rifle. "Last chance, Cutter," Jenkins shouted, "or the Holloway girl dies first." A loose stone shifted under Eli's boot, clattering down the rock face. One of the men looked up, his eyes widening. "He's here!" Eli's shot cut him off. The night exploded in gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around him. He returned fire with deadly precision, using the skills the war had burned into his memory. One man down, then another. They were trying to flank him, pinning him down in a crossfire. A bullet grazed his cheek, hot and sharp. His ammunition was running low. He was trapped. Then suddenly, new shots erupted from the trees behind his attackers. It wasn't Blackwood's men. They were being fired upon. Caught in a crossfire, 2 more of the pursuers fell. Jenkins dove for cover, shouting in confusion. "Who the hell?" His question was cut short by a final shot that dropped him where he stood. Silence. "Cutter," a voice called from the darkness. "You still alive up there?" Eli knew that voice. It was Burke. The Confederate soldier emerged from the trees, his rifle held loosely. "Told you I'd lead them north," Burke said with a grim smile. "Didn't expect you to circle back south so soon." "What are you doing here?" Eli demanded, his rifle still trained on the man. "Saving your hide, looks like," Burke said. "Your boys made it to Silver Falls?" I saw them on the trail, but Blackwood is on his way there now, with those forged documents. That's why I came looking for you. Burke's expression turned serious. There's something you need to know about your land, Cutter. It's not just gold. It's what the gold is sitting on. Your valley sits on the only viable pass for a railroad through these mountains. And underneath it all is one of the largest coal seams in the territory. The revelation hit Eli like a physical blow. It was never just about a mine. It was about controlling the future of the entire territory. His small homestead was the key to an empire. Blackwood has been buying up the land for years, Burke continued. Yours is the last piece. And Charlotte, she wasn't his sister. She was his fiancée. It's a scheme they've worked before. She marries the landowner, establishes a legal claim, and then the husband usually doesn't survive the process. A chill deeper than the mountain air ran down Eli's spine. If he hadn't come home early that day. We need to go, Burke said, his voice urgent. Blackwood will reach Judge Monroe's by morning. As dawn broke, they crested a rise overlooking the judge's estate. What they saw stopped them cold. The main house was engulfed in flames, and in the courtyard, surrounded by at least 10 armed men, stood Wendell Blackwood. Charlotte was beside him, her hand gripping Micah's shoulder. 2 men held a struggling Sam. Joshua stood frozen beside Ruth, who lay unconscious on the ground. We're too late, Burke muttered. But Eli wasn't listening. The careful control he had maintained, the tactical thinking, the measured responses, it all shattered. He saw his children in the hands of the monsters who had tried to destroy them, and something inside him broke. No, he said, his voice a deadly calm as he cocked his rifle. We're right on time. Burke grabbed the reins of Eli's horse. Wait, charging in there blind will get you and your boys killed. The logic, as cold as it was, cut through Eli's rage. He forced himself to breathe, to think like a soldier again. Below, Blackwood was directing his men. Judge Monroe, slumped between 2 guards, was being forced into a black carriage. They're taking him, Burke whispered. Load them all up, Blackwood ordered, his voice carrying on the morning air. I want to be back at the Richardson place by noon. Sam's voice, small but defiant, rang out. You can't do this. My PA will... The sharp crack of a slap silenced him. Your father, Blackwood said, his voice dripping with contempt, is likely dead by now. Jenkins had his orders. Charlotte stepped forward, a cruel smile on her face. Such loyalty. Your father didn't deserve it. He was a weak, pathetic man, so desperate for a woman's touch he never even questioned why someone like me would settle for him. Shut up! Sam lunged at her, only to be yanked back. We have to move, Burke hissed. They're loading the wagons. Eli's eyes darted around the chaotic scene, his mind racing, formulating a desperate, dangerous plan. He looked at the stables at the far end of the courtyard. Circle around to the wagons, he told Burke. When I create a distraction, get Ruth and the judge out. I'll go for the boys. What's the distraction? Eli's eyes were fixed on the stable. You'll know it when you see it. Eli crept toward the stables, the chaos and smoke from the burning house providing perfect cover. Inside, he moved quickly, unlatching every stall. He found a lantern and a pile of dry hay. Without a moment's hesitation, he kicked the lantern over. Flames exploded, catching the hay instantly. He ran back through the stable, slapping the horses' flanks, driving them out into the courtyard. Panic erupted. The terrified animals bolted, neighing wildly, scattering Blackwood's men like bowling pins. In the confusion, Eli sprinted toward the carriage. Across the yard, he saw Burke cutting Ruth's bonds. Joshua! Micah! Run! Eli bellowed, firing his rifle into the air. His sons reacted instantly. Sam drove an elbow into his captor's stomach and grabbed Joshua's hand. Micah, freed from a startled Charlotte's grasp, raced toward his brothers. Eli laid down covering fire, forcing Blackwood's men to dive for cover. Then he saw it. Charlotte, recovered from her surprise, was drawing a small derringer from her dress. She wasn't aiming at Eli. She was aiming at his fleeing sons. No! Eli screamed, breaking cover and charging toward her. A single shot rang out, but it wasn't from Charlotte's gun. She staggered, a look of shocked betrayal on her face. A red stain spread across the front of her dress. She looked down, then up at Blackwood, who stood 20 feet away, his own pistol still smoking. "Wendell?" she gasped. "You fool!" Blackwood snarled, his face a mask of fury. "I need those boys alive for the deed to be valid." Charlotte crumpled to the ground. Eli didn't stop. He snatched up her fallen pistol and dove behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. Blackwood was regrouping his men. "Find those boys and someone kill that interfering bastard." Eli saw Burke leading Ruth and the judge toward the safety of the trees. He had to buy them time, and he had to get to his sons. He took careful aim and fired at the ground near the carriage horses. They reared and bolted, dragging the empty carriage with them, adding to the chaos. Under the cover of the runaway carriage, Eli sprinted for the tree line where his sons had disappeared. He dove into the underbrush just as a volley of shots ripped through the branches above his head. "Pa?" It was Sam's voice. He found them, huddled behind a fallen log, terrified but unharmed. He gathered them into his arms, his heart threatening to beat out of his chest. "I promised, didn't I?" He led them through the woods, back to the spot where he and Burke had left their horses. Burke was already there, with Ruth and Judge Monroe. The old judge, though pale and shaken, looked at Eli with a newfound respect. "Well done, Cutter," he said. They rode hard away from the burning estate, away from the carnage. As they put distance between themselves and Blackwood, Judge Monroe explained what had happened. Blackwood had arrived with a forged deed, supposedly signed by Sarah, transferring the land to Charlotte in the event of Eli's death. He had threatened to expose a dark secret from the judge's past, that he had used his influence during the war to save his Confederate son from a hangman's noose, to force him to authenticate the forgery. "I was stalling when your children arrived with Miss Holloway," the judge said. "They told me the truth." When Blackwood's men stormed the house, the judge had been forced to sign the papers at gunpoint. "So the deed is valid," Eli said, his heart sinking. A small, grim smile touched the judge's lips. "Not quite. I signed yes, but I didn't sign as Judge Ezekiel Monroe. I signed as Ezekiel Smith. The authentication is worthless." Eli stared at him, then let out a short, sharp laugh. The old man had outsmarted him, but their fight was far from over. Blackwood would soon discover the deception. They needed to get to the territorial capital to present their evidence to the governor himself. They rode for 2 days, pushing themselves and their horses to the limit. They found allies in unexpected places. A farmer named Wilson, who hated Blackwood and rode ahead to warn Burke of the approaching men. And in Redemption Creek itself, Sheriff Grant, finally choosing a side, provided them with fresh horses and a map of a secret trail. But Blackwood was relentless. His influence was everywhere. His men were searching every town, every road. The bounty on Eli's head was now $2,000, a fortune that would turn any desperate man into a hunter. Their only hope lay in the evidence Eli now carried. In the courthouse in Redemption Creek, in a daring nighttime raid aided by Ruth's saloon-keeper uncle, they had found it. Not just the survey maps showing the coal and the railroad pass, but a letter. A letter from the territorial governor, dated 1863, recommending that the land in Redemption Valley be reserved for national interest and not open for private claim. Blackwood hadn't just been trying to steal land from a widower. He had been trying to steal it from the United States government. But in a final, terrifying confrontation in the saloon cellar, Blackwood had cornered them. He had traded their lives for the maps. Eli had given them up, but not before palming the most important piece of evidence, the governor's letter. Now, as they approached the capital, that single piece of paper was their last, desperate hope. The city was a sprawling, chaotic place, a world away from the quiet mountains Eli called home. Judge Monroe led them to the office of a territorial senator, a man he trusted. As Eli, his sons, Ruth, and Burke laid out their story, presenting the governor's letter and the judge's sworn testimony, the senator's face grew grimmer and grimmer. He sent for the U.S. Marshals. The takedown was swift and decisive. They found Blackwood in his lavish hotel suite, preparing to meet with railroad investors. When the Marshals burst in, he didn't even look surprised. He just smiled that cold, thin smile. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he told them. But he was wrong. They knew exactly who he was. The evidence was irrefutable. The governor's letter proved the land was never legally his to pursue. Judge Monroe's testimony exposed the forgery and blackmail. Burke testified to the conspiracy and the murders of those who stood in his way. Sheriff Grant's telegram from Redemption Creek corroborated the pattern of intimidation. And finally, Sam and Ruth gave heartbreaking testimony about Charlotte's cruelty and the terror they had endured. It was a house of cards built on greed and fear, and it came tumbling down. Wendell Blackwood's empire crumbled. His political allies abandoned him. His assets were seized. He would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison, a king reduced to a number. Back in Redemption Creek, the town slowly began to heal. The people, freed from Blackwood's shadow, came to Eli, their faces filled with shame and apology. He held no grudges. He understood the power of fear. He stood with his sons and with Ruth on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, looking out over the valley, his valley. The land was safe, secured by a federal order. His family was whole. Ruth, no longer a ghost from a broken promise, was now a part of their family, her laughter filling the rooms that had once held so much silence and pain. The pocket watch and the locket were never found, but Eli realized he didn't need them anymore. He had Sarah's legacy right here in the faces of his brave sons. He had faced down a tyrant, fought against impossible odds, and walked through the fire. He had done it all to keep a promise to his children. The world had tried to take everything from him, but in the end, love had been the one thing more powerful than greed. His family had found their way back together, and Elijah Cutter, the quiet man from the mountains, was finally home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next thrilling tale. And let me know in the comments below, what would you have done in Elijah's position?